I can let loose then. Nice to meet you. Finally.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, sorry about getting my presentation due so late. I even switched it up too, so I like re-put it on there and put it on your flash drive and like tried to save it on your like little other drive. I was like, got here like an hour early. I was like, I'm just gonna check this. And like, oh, I'm gonna make this change. And I was like, oh, her thing's up. I'm just gonna. I think it was Dawn's or whatever.
Oh,
but,
yeah, that's great. Thank you
so
so much.
yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It's crazy. I love how it happens when everything you talk about kind of relates to everything else in the conference, which is the point. But like, you don't really know what people are going to talk about in the conference when you're writing a presentation. And I'm like, wow, this really relates. So
That's great.
yeah.
Well, good luck.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Great. Hold on. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So thanks for choosing to attend my session this morning. There are a lot of good competing discussions and workshops and sessions, so I appreciate you guys coming here. We had a lot of great talks this conference so far, so I'm really excited to see where these conversations go once we go home today. My name is Liz Gillespie, and I have a doctorate in soil science from North Carolina State University. My research is in the realm of soil and environmental geochemistry, but I would like to advance, and within the past 2 years, I've tried to advance into more of a nutritional, crop nutritional, and viticulture background. So today I'm going to talk to you about some of the challenges working at a larger scale organic farm. So that's Badger Mountain Vineyard, organic vineyard in Kennewick, Washington. And then really what the definition of regenerative ag means to them. And then how we are working towards a direction towards regenerative ag, even though we're already organic certified. So this wouldn't be made possible without a couple of key players, and they're not here today, but I really wanted to highlight them real quick. So our general manager and managing partner, Mickey Doon. So a lot of the practices we do can't be made possible without a management that believes in the cause. So Mickey is a big advocate of sustainability, organic, and pushing us towards regenerative practices. And then Marlisa Lacree, and she's the director of marketing and director to consumer sales. And she is not only just directing and marketing the sustainability that we have, she lives with it. It just radiates out of her, and you can just tell she's a steward of the land, and it really comes out in all of our products. So I'd like to highlight those two as they are big within the company for this. So I'm just going to give you a little background about Badger Mountain Vineyard, the importance of soils and knowing your soils and your management practices, and how that will help with your organic and regenerative ag practices. What is regenerative ag, and that it's not just another sexy phrase, and how we adapted to the changes and challenges that are occurring right now as we move into more of these regenerative practices, some of our research and collaboration efforts, and then if I have time, a little bit about facing reality with urban development. So Badger Mountain Vineyard was founded in 1982 by Bill Powers, and his vision really began with our responsibility to the environment and how it extends to producing completely natural products under our Badger Mountain line. He, at the time, noticed that a lot of conventional vineyards, a lot of vineyards were using pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and he wanted to do something that was different. He wanted to go natural. And so there were a couple of vineyards in California that were organic, but none in Washington. And so he decided to create Badger Mountain Vineyard with organic practices. In 1990, it was the first certified USDA organic vineyard in Washington, and currently continues to be a leader in this field. So we really rely on not just overloading our vineyards with organic herbicides and insecticides and pesticides, but really focusing on more of an integrative approach. So only using what we need, and then really relying on the experiences and innovation of our employees and those that came before us, like Bill Powers. Okay, so before I talk about the challenges at Badger Mountain Vineyard and the management practices used in response to those challenges, I want to dig a little deeper, pun intended, about what the role of soil plays in our farms, small or large. So I want you guys to kind of get together with those around you and talk about what are some ways that soil helps support your crops, and how do they manage, or how do you manage those? So don't be shy. Ryan, go talk to someone. You have to get up and talk to someone. It's early. Get those bones moving. How are soils important? What do they do? And how do you manage your soils? Yeah, there are definitely hints up there. Yeah, so again, what are some ways that your soils help support your crops? And then what do you do management-wise with those soils? Yeah,
Mycorrhizae and the flora and fauna.
yes,
The community. Soil food web if you want to get there.
exactly. And that's kind of what we're showing up there is that soil food web and how that really plays a role in the nutrition and yeah. All right, 30 more seconds. All right, perfect. We've heard from one person, mycorrhizome. And then who else? What are some other ways that soils help support crops and kind of your management? Anyone?
Say it again. We're calling people.
Yeah. How do soils support your crops? Go ahead, Ryan.
Soils support the plant by supporting their life.
Yep.
The physical action is actually producing being the structural support,
Structural support.
as well as all the vegetative growth above ground,
Yeah.
and everything.
Right. What else? Moisture. Yeah. Regulates water. Lynn, anyone else? Nutrients. Yeah. Helps regulate. It gives us nutrients. Yeah. Great.
Macro and minerals.
Yes, macro, micro, minerals. So helps in multiple ways, regulating water, sustaining plants in animal life, filtering and buffering out pollutants, cycling of nutrients, and then even things that sometimes we don't think about, but the foundation of what we're on and in right now in this convention center is because of soil.
And carbon sequestration.
Yep, and we'll get to that for sure, definitely. So at Badger Mountain Vineyard, we really take an approach to get to know your soil and what is in it and how that helps you manage. Because what is in your soil is really going to dictate how you manage. I can't emphasize that enough. So what we have here, and you don't really need to see it too much, is just a map of Badger Mountain Vineyard. And we have 70 acres of grapes, of wine grapes, of different varieties. And you can kind of see that here in the different colors. All the different colors are different varieties. Don't need to know what they are, doesn't matter, just know that all those are different varieties. So what you can do is anyone, anywhere can go to Soil Web. I wish I had a little pointer. Soil Web, and it can give you a map of what soil series you have, which basically just describes what's in your soil. Here I go a little specific and have soil maps. But what I really want you to focus on is the fact that there are two different types of soil series within, or map units within our vineyard. We have a WDAB and a WFC2. So what does that mean? On a basic level, that's basically telling us that our soils are not the same and we cannot manage them the same. So our WDAB it has a Warden series, which again will tell you all the different types that's in it. It's an aridisol, both are aridisols, which basically means that it's arid. But the thing that I like people to look at is what is your texture? Do you know what your soil texture is? So ours is, in this side, on the western side, is a silt loam, and it's 0 to 5% slope. However, on the eastern side, and mostly in the majority of the portion, it's actually very fine sandy, so we have some pretty sandy soils, and it's 0 to 15% slope. Do you guys think we're gonna manage that the same? No, not at all. So, digging in a little deeper, what does that mean? As a soil chemist, we like to look at kind of how is that going to react to the nutrients? How is that going to react to water management? So things like that WDAB has really high silt. You'll see it has roughly 68% silt. So that means nutrients are more likely to grab onto the silt in that one, in that section. Whereas in WFC2, you've got 63% sand. I don't think any of those nutrients are going to grab onto that sand. So again, if you are applying nutrients, you may need more in that middle and eastern section than you do on the other side. You also have a higher slope on that side, so you're going to get more erosion. You're going to get more water runoff, things like that. Other things you can look at in your vineyard or farm or wherever you are growing, garden, or is your cation exchange capacity, and this really influences the soil's ability to hold on to essential nutrients. It also provides a buffer against soil acidity. And so these are pretty similar, but the higher the cation exchange capacity, the more likely you are to be able to exchange those nutrients. And again, we see that on the left side that has a little bit higher silt. Bulk density looks pretty good, actually. Probably changed over time, but a higher bulk density is an indicator that there's what? If you have a higher bulk density, what do you think that's an indication of for your soils? I'm not going to tell you everything. Not quite. Compaction. Yeah, compaction. Also an indicator of low soil porosity. Okay. So how many are you from the eastern Washington? Okay, west side? Okay, west side. So we've got kind of a split. So I'm going to talk to you today about mostly the eastern side and how soil forming factors really shape our farm and why it's so good for growing grapes. So how many of you know where your soils come from? What is your parent material? Yeah, you know everything.
No.
What is it?
Volcano.
Volcano, yep. Very good. Anywhere else? What about west side? Do you know where your soils come from? If not, look it up. That's really going to help again in your management practices. So today, on these next couple slides, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about where Badger's history comes from and why it makes it so good for farming. If it's slow, it's because the transition's slow. Okay, so we are, underneath of us is the Columbia River Basalt Group. This is where a lot of your minerals come from. So we have good supply of manganese and iron, magnesium, calcium, and other trace elements. This actually comes from the rocks and weathering from that. So if you have something like sandstone underneath of you, you're probably not going to have a lot of nutrients in your soils, and that's going to dictate how much nutrients you may need to add. We also have windblown and lacustrine origin of soils. So basically lake as well as kind of windblown. And so that's the reason why we have a lot of silt. And again, that retention of nutrients. As we mentioned over here, we have volcanic ash, and that's unique. It's a unique layer. So volcanic ash can have a lot of water capacity and also compaction, but luckily we're not all volcanic ash, but it's also really lush in natural minerals. And then glaciers. We are really unique in that we had the Missoula floods, which had a lot of glaciers. And so we have finer particles, and we also have a lot of sand where we're at. So sand helps us with water infiltration, so we can really control that irrigation, how much we need to irrigate, and we're so dry that we can really tell and give our plants what we need rather than having to try and work around the weather. So for topography, it's another important role. It impacts things like drainage, runoff. As you heard, we have a range of topography in ours. So we need to consider things like, what is your irrigation? Do you have pressure regulating emitters? How do you adapt to topography in your fields? And then other things like, are you south-facing versus north-facing? Because south-facing typically gets warmer and dry out faster because they receive more solar radiation. And so thinking of things like this and how soil genesis, and like how it affects soil genesis. So, kind of topography. Okay, organisms. How many of you till? We till. How many of you have cover crop in your farms? Great. How many of you have earthworms in your farms? We don't. How many of you see organisms in your vineyards or farms? Yeah, we don't. So organisms are super important. It produces substances that help plants absorb nutrients and water from the soils. The more that we degrade the soil, the more that we manipulate the soil, the less these organisms are going to be here. So I love this saying, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. 1 teaspoon of soil contains 1 million to 1 billion tiny microscopic microorganisms. Most of that is found in and around the roots in the topsoil. And like I was saying, all these organisms that really aid in the production of these nutrients, the movement of them, movement of nutrients into your crops, which gives you yield and productivity. If that's gone, it will decrease with soil and disturbances, and if it's gone, you're not going to have nutrients and you're not going to have crops. So my question is, how long does it take to form an inch of this topsoil? Mm-hmm. Anyone? A century, okay. Longer, yeah. It really depends on your climate, topography, etc. But yeah, about 100 years. About 100 years. Okay, another great thing I like to talk about with Eastern Washington is climate. We are dry with no humidity, and that really means a decrease in mildew and a decrease in rot. The less mildew and rot, the less we have to apply. Average rainfall is about 8 inches, and a lot of that happens outside of the growing season. So if we apply amendments to the soil, they can be added in through the moisture and precipitation that occurs during the off season, so it provides rich availability of nutrients during the growing season. We also have a lot of wind, a lot. And that can be a bad thing, but it can also be really good because if you work your canopy correctly or work your crops correctly, it can allow for breathability and then decrease in pests. So I'll talk about it in a bit, but we have overhead in some of our vineyard. So we're very susceptible to rot or mildew, but with that correct canopy pruning and breeze, we actually are able to dry it out. So the wind is probably a good thing if we work it right. However, the climate recently has become very unpredictable, as a lot of you have known. There's earlier frosts, there's flooding, heat spells, we've had smoke taint, droughts, depending on where you live. So with that being said, just one alteration to any of these forming factors, climate, which is happening, topography, time, any of it, organisms, if it's gone because of tillage or erosion, any of those will change your soil type. And that's going to change your soil management. So I want you to think here about the forming factors that might have changed for you in the past 5 years and what you've have to done differently because of management, because of these events. So again, what forming factors might have changed for you in the past 5 years, and then if you had to do anything different for your management because of those. Let's go ahead and get together and talk about it for a couple minutes. All right, so think about how one of these or any of these forming factors might have changed for you and what you might have changed in your management practices because of it. 30 seconds. All right, who wants to go first? Love the enthusiasm. Lynn's group. No? Yeah. That's great. I'll write some notes down. Okay. Ryan?
We talked about,
Heat.
yeah, I think suggesting big plots and crops as part of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
And also the affecting the dryness of the soil.
Yep.
That in turn protects the life of the soil.
Right. Yeah. You guys over there? Besides heat, or with heat, what did you have to do management-wise? That was different.
For myself, I just haven't been interested in building sites because it was a landfill that was dumped around and then got buried.
Hmm.
And so we're sorting through years of decisions. That rain's coming up, so I would classify it more spirit than soil at this point, but we're getting there. Yeah.
Mm. Was there anything you could do for that? Yeah, so you added temperature sensing fans and some water spray. Yep. All right, great. So we also naturally experienced a lot of issues as well with these recent changes. One of them was heat. We also had early frost, which created a lot of difficulties in the quality of our grapes and the heat spikes that happened in June. Oh. Okay, so what we saw were decreases in yields all across Washington State for wine grapes. We thought originally it was about 20%. When harvest came, it went anywhere from 30 to 70% in decrease in yields. We had one where we were contracted to get Gewürztraminer, and it ended up being a 70% decrease. It was inconsistent berry size, shriveling, smaller overall berries, and we did notice that the west facing was more impacted than the east facing. Yeah.
In the blueberry space, within blueberries, it seems to be the nuisance of it literally in Black Valley, 105 degrees. And then this one, they're super healthy, you know, they're like 6%
Mhm.
higher, 7. Neighboring, all tips are,
Yeah, so we,
So, you know, all we can say is the nutrition is so much better here, it's
Yep.
organic.
mm-hmm,
And the traditional soil samples and the types of samples we're doing are not picking up, but it's actually being taken up. So that's what I saw,
right.
and I think that's going to work out.
Yeah, interesting. So some of the adaptations that we did were increased watering. We skipped leafing our canopy to try and provide a little bit more shapes for the grapes. And we also applied excess overhead. So do you know what habits were really hard for us to break through these adaptations: increasing watering, skipping leafing the canopy, and applying excess overhead. All of these are not typical for a vineyard, but were adaptations we had to take during this heat wave. Some other things was smoke taint. That was a very difficult year in 2020. We really relied on constant information from WSU and pretty consistent feedback. So turnover that was like in-time turnover about what's going on and what do we do. Is it worth spraying our fields? Is it worth spraying the leaves? It wasn't. Do we fan our vineyards? It didn't matter. So kind of understanding and really reaching out to extension agents to understand what management practices do we need to do during the smoke taint, and obviously smoke taint analysis. So this year, what we learned is we didn't really need to do things like spraying the leaves or adding wind application, but what we did do was early testing. So testing the grapes for early testing. And we decided with our winemaker that it was better to pull grapes early, so to harvest early if we noticed smoke taint, than it was to allow it to get to its full sugar potential. We did ETI in Seattle. So our question was, how do we adapt to changes such as climate? And then what can we do to ensure that our farmland soils produce for generations? And this is where we get into regenerative agriculture. And I put up all these wonderful definitions because one of the main challenges, and I loved that it was highlighted multiple times in this conference already, is what is regenerative ag? It's a big challenge to be able to define this and then really create guidelines like we have with organic. So I just pulled a couple definitions from random places. One was Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Another one was the Regenerative Agricultural Initiative and Carbon Underground. And then one was from NRCS. But overall, their one goal that they all seem to have in common is to restore carbon and preserve our soils, thus our ecosystems. So not just focusing on bringing carbon back into the soil, but thinking about the soil, the microorganisms, the other organisms, the air, and the people. So kind of creating this holistic approach. Okay, so what is the difference between sustainable and regenerative ag? Well, in 1990, there was the Farm Bill that defined sustainable agriculture, and that included farms that satisfy human food fiber needs while also enhancing environmental quality. But really, what it means is that, what people think it means is that sustainable practices seek to maintain systems without degrading them, while regenerative ag is a natural system and recognizes how natural systems are currently impacted, and then apply techniques to restore the system to improve productivity. So sustainable is maintain, regenerative is really restoring and then improving the productivity of your land. So thinking again of things like soils, crops, air, people, and then how do we keep the soil living? I like to say that it's not just a sexy phrase. There's a lot of research out there, and you heard it earlier in some of the other talks about what regenerative ag or the practices that come along with regenerative ag can do. So I'm not going to full on read all this, but you get better health and better fertility, so long-term production. Nutrients stay in the soil. It builds natural habitats, fostering organisms that battle bad pests. You get increased carbon in soils. We all know that. Nutrient-dense crops without the added pesticides. You get reduced erosion, especially with increase in urban development occurring. And then biodiversity. One other topic that came up with regenerative ag and in general that I loved hearing was soil health was the need to monetize soil health and studies, economic studies, so impact studies on this. And there's been a few. So we know that there can be a decrease in cost with using livestock feed, pesticides, herbicides, et cetera, which there is a positive impact thus on farm profitability and visibility. And then I found a couple of stats although more research is needed, that from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, where an investment of $57 billion in regenerative agriculture practices would yield a projected return of $1.9 trillion. And then another research study found that farms with regenerative practices were 78% more profitable than conventional plots. What was interesting about that is the yields were actually lower, but they ended up being more profitable. So that was a neat study, and I recommend kind of reading up on that. So with that, I just want to talk about some of the challenges that we go through in our organic vineyard. And while I'm going to talk about the challenges, I really want to recognize that the hard work of keeping a farm and wines organic, and anyone that's practicing organic and doing it the right way, it's not easy. So I'm really going to be highlighting challenges, but that because I want to be able to have us learn from each other, but really know that we've done such a great job, and I'm so proud of Badger Mountain for all of their work that they've done trying to keep it organic and doing the right things. Okay. So, all right, first challenge, no synthetic fertilizers and using compost. So why is compost a challenge? Well, we use pumice, which is recycled material from the wine grapes, leaves, stems, and it creates, as well as the grape juice. So it goes through our crusher, and all of the juice ends up going into our wastewater treatment system, which goes back into the fields. Couple things. It only goes into certain spots in the fields, and it's very high in potassium. So we get higher pHs going into the system and higher salts. We do see this reflected in our plant tissue samples, though it's not to an extreme yet. So what do we do? Consistent plant tissue, nutrient plan analysis, compost and irrigation water. What we mentioned yesterday was what I found to be so true was the cost of this. Not all of us can afford to constantly, even a larger scale like us, can't afford to constantly test 3 times, 4 times a year, every year. So I'll talk about it later, but we tried to reach out to local universities, and as well as trying to team up with partner agricultural testing labs for bulk discounts, things like that, to see how can we reduce costs. Because this is really important for us to know, because we need to know how to manage it. We do integrative nutrient management, so basically that's finding areas based on these results and apply our nutrients, our compost, to those areas. So while we do have the liquid irrigation that can't be moved, we also have compost that we mix with organic manure from Sunnyside. And we do spread that every year. And sometimes we spread it in areas or blocks that we know are way lower in nutrients. And then sometimes don't spread it in other blocks because we don't need to, because we know there's enough nutrients in there. So we also are looking at developing a future waste management distribution program. We know we have an issue with the wastewater distribution, and sometimes that's the first step to regenerative, is just knowing you have an issue, knowing that there's a problem, and then creating that action plan forward. I clicked the button, I swear. There we go, okay. All right, challenge. Any pesticides or insecticides must be from natural materials. This can be so frustrating because I have friends that are in other vineyards that are conventional, and they'll just spray something and then their issue's gone. And we have to struggle with natural materials that aren't as strong and can't battle some pests as easily. So what we try to do is a mix of scouting, historical references, and then again, only spraying where we need to. I think one thing we learned was really the historical documentation of where are our trouble areas, and then scouting to control the pest constantly help us understand kind of when do we need to apply, and then what areas are doing well and what aren't. And then figuring out why are the pests there in the first place. So not just trying to see a problem and then spray it, but then trying to understand why. So for example, we know that we have overhead in one location. We constantly get, say, well, mildew, we'll just use mildew, it's not, still a pest, or rot. And so we know that we need to target that area every year. It's gonna happen, it's a problem, it's just a location. Eventually, we know we're gonna move to drip irrigation, and that can be a solution for that. So really targeting why is it happening, et cetera. All right, leaf hoppers love us. We have so many leaf hoppers on our field, and we actually do a really good job controlling this. This year was a little tough because we had so many impacts happening at the same time with heat, and just honestly, COVID was an issue with manpower, and that's something we can talk about if you want. But leaf hoppers love us. And so some challenges are you can't use powerful synthetic insecticides. And then I'll get to this in a second, but we have equipment to remove leaf hoppers. But if you have a lot of them, they need to run all the time. So you're having equipment on your field. So you get compaction, you can get tractor blight, you can get damage to your vineyards. However, we are lucky that we have what we call the bug blower, or pest fan. They call it the pest fan, but I think the bug blower has a cooler name. And so that's what you see in the top right-hand corner. And this was developed by Bill Powers and our vineyard manager. So what it does is it blows, as it goes through, it's a tractor, and then it has a fan built on the back, and then these two kind of catch screens. And actually it was really neat that back in the day they used oil on the bottom of the pans to catch the leaf hoppers, but now they did one of our vineyard managers, foremans, did a study and used soap. So he was like, soap is better than oil. And I thought that was really neat to see someone active in the field think about these things. Anyway, so now we use soap. And what it does is it blows as it goes through. It blows the fans and it blows the leaf hoppers onto the screens and then catches into these pans. And we just kind of welded it on, makeshifted it ourselves, and then it goes through. And it reduced our leaf hoppers significantly. We start early in the season to try and catch it when it's the babies. We stop when it's flowering, and then continue if needed in certain areas. Yeah.
Does the air from the blower flow just to the side, or is it from like the sprayer machine?
Yep. So it's from, I think the fan is from a type of sprayer. Huh?
Air blast sprayer.
Yep. But and then I think from what I saw is it does go to the sides, but I think there's like a fan where they kind of manipulate it too to hit more of the like when they weld something on top so it gets more to the sides than up and over. It's a lot of welding, but yeah. And so when it gets bad, there is organic applications we can apply too. And so I do believe that there can be a balanced approach between the two of these. So if we have to apply some type of organic herbicide to mitigate this, plus our bug blower, and then kind of watch it as the next year or two goes. I know that sometimes people are like, oh, don't spray, but if you don't have healthy plants either, you're not going to have any production. So really understanding how do we mesh our two, and how do we mitigate it appropriately, and then start early. So ideally, start before when there's the hatchlings. But anyway, that was a really cool technique that we have. Okay, I clicked the button. All right, we have two types of irrigation: drip and overhead. So this, as I alluded to earlier, mixed system makes it really difficult to effectively and efficiently manage our water, which is very important for crop yield and health and growth. And so our overhead, especially in certain spots, really leads to mildew or rot, and that can lead to increased use of insecticides if we don't manage it properly. And so what we try to do, and this is new this year, which was a very difficult year to do this given the heat, was we installed water moisture sensors, and we also use field technique and as well as scouting, to see if there's any how the water's doing in the plants. Are they staying green? Does it look like they need water? And then again, the field test method. So if you go in, does it feel like it's moisture? Does it feel like it's too wet? NRCS has some great references on how to perform those for the soil. And then kind of combining all those resources to figure out how much and when do we add water. Eventually, we want to get further to be able to do a more controlled, regulated deficit irrigation, and then eventually add pressure-regulated emitters. So again, we have that big slope, and so that's something that's very important. You see that it's a slower drip on the top of the slopes in some of our varieties and blocks, and much faster at the bottom. So how do you adapt for that, knowing that you're not going to be getting the same management within the same block of the same variety? All right, high pH soils. So a lot of the macro and micronutrients that we need for our vineyards and crops, they're released around a pH, or they become available around a pH of 6.5 to 7. We have about 8.2 of a pH. So a lot of the nutrients we need are being trapped in the soil and not actually getting up into the plants. So what we've been trying to do over the past few years is naturally amend the soil by adding elemental sulfur to it, which is recognized by WSDA as being able to add onto your soils. And then what we do is we allow it to sit over that winter period where we get most of our moisture, and then allow that moisture to work its way into the soil profile and have it naturally kind of lower the pH. So good concept, still working on this. We add, as I told you earlier, the compost, which is high pH, and the wastewater, which is high pH. So we're kind of at a standstill, and that's something that they'll address hopefully in the future as well. But being able to naturally amend your soils is a great way to kind of get those nutrients to stay in there for the long run. Some people do it through irrigation, your irrigation system, but ultimately, again, you want to kind of create your soil to have those nutrients in the right pH.
So are you using acid particular other irrigation?
No. Okay. Weeds, not really the cover crop you want. I was talking to some people earlier about weeds. It was really cool. They were showing me a little weed robot that goes and picks up the weeds. That was so awesome. So we do burning to try and get our weeds out. However, while it's a good technique, unfortunately, it does release carbon and it can scorch the vines over time. And then again, you even get some issues of if you hit a vine, you can get tractor blight, things like that. And then you have the compaction again. So again, you're putting more tractor on there. And then also in the winter, some areas with our cover crop are bare, and that can lead to heavy erosion. Again, remembering our moisture happens mostly in the winter, and loss of nitrogen. So what we do is we do have some areas, and we're hoping to increase this, is natural vetch and sage between rows. And we're really trying to work with our vineyard manager on what he wants. So looking at different cover crops that maybe he's interested in, like ones we don't have to water, for example, and then working on mowing rather than, so letting it grow in the winter, but then mowing during the season rather than tilling it in. It would be nice if you can to remove the weeds if you're new. Again, I recommend cover crop and mowing. If you're young, probably weeding, trying to weed. If you're smaller, as best you can, then cover crop and mowing, see if cover crop can outgrow some of the weeds. If it's certain types of weeds, that could be your cover crop, depending on what it is. If you're established like us, which is over 30 years, we have some pretty nasty weeds. So it's going to be a mix of cover crop, probably maybe some organic herbicide and weeding and birding until we can get it to a point where it's just cover crop and mowing, but knowing that we're moving in that direction. And you'll notice that with a lot of regenerative organic practices is you got to start somewhere, but you have to have a plan to move forward till you get to where you need to be. So we're getting there. All right, so what are we doing right now? We're working with a certified crop advisor and soil scientist to build better management plans. Again, trying to monitor everything, looking at tractor and tillage information. What are we doing now? What are the areas can we minimize it? Where do we need to till, but where do we not need to? So kind of trying to document that and then advise it. So creating that action plan, again, targeting the specific areas that may need more or less nutrients, and then really developing kind of a strategic plan that's 2 to 3 to 5 years. And that's preventative for areas in the vineyard that are susceptible to leafhopper, powdery mildew, things like that. So what do we do now? What do we do in the long term? And how do we mitigate it so we don't have to run into these issues of constantly running our machine or having an outbreak? Assessing the irrigation system is going to be important for anybody at any farm. That's going to be a number one, whether it's efficiency, water use, that's going to be a big cost. So what is your filtration system? Is it big enough for you? Are you filtering it? Do you use a filter? Do you clean it? Is it, because that could change your pressure. So really trying to understand your water management with irrigation, and that's something that, again, we're tackling. We're trying to diversify, so we're trying to get every row to have year-round crops, cover crops, and again, find what works for you. And then if you're interested in biodynamics, I know our manager is interested in adding some pollinators or other things that could bring in. We're getting more bees around, which is nice. So what other things can you do? Start testing for soil health. No, it's not just another sexy phrase. Soil health is really important. What is soil health? What do you test for? I'll mention that in a second, but trying to link up with, again, maybe your local WSU extension and trying to figure out what dictates a healthy soil, and then how do you test for that? How do you look for that in your soil, and what are the indicators? And then we are trying to strive for a regenerative organic certification. At first, a little skeptical of it, but when we dived in, it was really a nice program that tries to kind of streamline all of this and guide you. It's a mix of soil health, animal welfare, and social justice. So you need some type of action plan for all of these. Again, it's great guidelines and resources to get you started. And there's one vineyard in Oregon that's finally certified, and I think one vineyard in California that's certified. So it starts with you and a management that believes in the cause. So where do we go from here? Collaboration. I'm not kidding. Reach out. There's a lot of information, and people will help you, just like we mentioned at the TILF conference. Maybe that's something that people here can help with, whether it's filling out paperwork, because that's a big thing. How do you document? So the Washington Soil Health Initiative is doing a lot of work on this. They're funding a bunch of research, extension, demonstration activities. And then with that, we have our collaboration efforts. So like I mentioned, the Washington Soil Health Initiative surveying, we actually reached out to them, and they came and did their own soil health sampling on our vineyard. So they took several different samples of active carbon, pH, nematodes, several different indicators of what they thought might be of soil health, all for free. Compared it to different blocks that looked healthy or not healthy within the same variety. And those are still being worked on, but it's from a grad student. So it benefits them and her research, and it also benefits us because it gives us an idea of where to work. Again, the regenerative organic certification and working with the Equitable Food Initiative. This is the social justice portion. And they're really big on coming to you and your farm and working with you to establish a program to help you build communication between you and your employees. So whether you're leadership or employee, they teach you where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, where do you need to work on to increase productivity within your organization. Other ones like research and funding opportunities with USDA, P&L, and again, really utilizing WSU Extension. Bringing it home, soil is heterogeneous, so it's going to differ from field to field. Yes, you can rely on what your neighbor's doing, maybe as a guideline, but ultimately you need to know your soil. You need to understand it to know what your management's going to be and know that it's going to change. And it's okay to break your habits. As we all saw this year, there's going to be things we're going to have to do different. We're going to have to adapt. So before you repeat your habits, think regenerative. And in that sense, ask yourself, is the management practice regenerating my soil? Diversify your farms. And then just know that environmental change is inevitable right now. And so that means your management practice changes might be too. Reach out. We're learning from everybody, but know that there are people out there that can help you get through this. And then I love this phrase, if you know your soil, you're going to know that there's going to be life, but if there's no soil, there's no life. Real fast, I'm just going to say that we also have issues with urban development. Land access was a big topic here in this conference. We are now completely 360 degrees surrounded by urban development. We were originally surrounded by orchards, and we have now been rezoned into residential. So while there is decrease in pests, there is an increase in humans. So how do we as a farm, organic farm, manage this challenge? And so I just got goosebumps. So there's a lot of struggle with this, and I'm happy to talk more about it individually, but ultimately you really need to develop community support and then increase those marketing strategies and then evaluate and define or redefine your company's strategic plan. So where do you want to be? Who are you marketing to? And how do you move forward? Because if you're rezoned into residential and everyone else is around you, what is your plan? So those are just some challenges. It probably will, yeah. And our land is worth a lot now. Yeah. So with that, I'll be happy to take some questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's 70. I think the whole property itself is 80.
Could you sell the development rights?
Yeah. And it's difficult because at what point do you look for a new location versus what point do you try to stay and keep it there?
Things like when you're adjusting the sulfur, it's loud and all that, but it's still
Yep.
sticky and.
Yep, exactly. So re-looking at, so that's a great point. So adapting that management change. How do we amend? So how do we amend our sulfur when we apply it to the soil? I know they do it at night, but, well, we don't do it for mildew. No. Mm-mm. Yeah. Yep. Well, cover crop would help with dust in general, like, pardon? No helicopters or planes, but our production is loud during harvest. And I wish I had a picture of it, but there are, there's our production building, like one of our warehouses, and then there's the road to like the first house. Yeah, I think 10 feet of our property is actually the new development property, so. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep.
So the rights of farm didn't help you so much.
I'm not certified organic yet, but I started application process this year.
Okay.
And I noticed that like a lot of the
It's a,
keep track of, I went and looked for leaf hopper today, and I tried the leaf blower, and that didn't work, and now I'm spraying, and like, where do you like?
Yeah. That's a great question. So, for those, I don't know, that are watching is going through the organic certification and knowing that it's a lot of documentation. And yes, it is. So right now, currently we're hybrid. So there's a lot of written, there's questions online. I didn't know that. So there's a hybrid. So right now our vineyard manager actually documents everything by hand, and we're trying to get away from that. And so when I was doing it, I would just document things in like a online document, like a Word document kind of thing, and just note it. The regenerative organic certification actually has templates for documentation on some things, and so I started using that, at least for soil health testing, which was pretty cool. And so then I would make an Excel spreadsheet and then just kind of do like my tillage day, what we did, and just make it quick, just very quick words of what we did. And same with the organic practices. And then I would just keep everything in a folder on my desktop, trying to move towards online, and then keeping track of like your organic systems plan. You'll need that. And then like, who are your contacts, and like each year, kind of separating it by year, just in case it's different. So yeah, but look for spreadsheets. Regenerative organic certification has some good templates. And then just like think of ways to create your own, and just create it quick. Like it doesn't need to be too detailed. Yeah. And it's obviously a 3-year process for certification. Yeah.
Maybe you want to address the online.
I don't know how to get them back. Yeah.
You said, question, comment about diversification. Seems like grapes kind of a monocrop, but
Mhm.
about organic system, you want multiple types of plants, and with that, you probably want other crops too.
Mhm.
You sort of getting cover crops in the rows that may be beneficial for making honey, or
Yep.
sort of product with that.
Yeah, so we've talked about it, and it depends on your capacity. And so if you can do it, do it. That would be great. So we don't have the capacity to, harvest the honey or kind of do more than what we can now. So finding something that just naturally brings in diversity is where we would need to go. So if it brings in pollinators or something like that. We've talked about adding in, since we can't do more there, adding in like a community garden or something up front where our tasting room is. But then another thing that they'll ask you about is, that brings in certain diversity, is barriers. So do you have some type of barrier around your farm? And like trees or whichever, which brings in birds, nesting, homes. Actually, all of ours got demolished because of the homes. So our birds went down, plus or minus. So we don't have birds eating it. Our pests actually went down. A lot of our pests went down. But at the same time, we don't have that diversity. So, yeah.
Probably get a whole class on regulations and whole thing, how it all happens. It sounds like a slow crash, slow motion crash. You didn't really want it to happen.
Yeah, there's,
It happened around you, whether you want it or not.
right, yeah, it definitely is its own topic of presentation. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
On that note, it seems like, so people moving in, do they want to be next to a vineyard? And is there value in increasing the vineyard? Is there value for the community or the county?
I love that question. So the question was, with the people moving around the vineyard, is there value, do they want the vineyard, and is there value in kind of keeping the vineyard around? And yes, and who knows, are my two answers. So yes, because we had a large support come out when people found out about the rezoning, which necessarily isn't a bad thing as long as nothing happens to it, because then our waste system gets into the city rather than county. So then we'd have better waste management, believe it or not, and pay less for it. But people were scared about what that meant, because obviously if you're rezoned, then you have the chance of selling out. So our community all around us came in and just, flooded us with support. So it showed that yes, the direct community around Badger Mountain Vineyard is all for keeping the vineyard there. And again, it's perfect. People walk there, there's horse trails around there. There's events, so it's easy for them to just come, and a lot of positive support. But as you build these new homes, especially right up to the production, who's to say what are the HOA regulations? Who's to say what's the noise complaint? That's unpredictable. So the ones already established are all for it, but the new ones, while they may find it appealing to be next to a vineyard, there's also a production facility. So I don't know if they've really thought out the pros and cons of that.
You guys use big fans and glass stuff for
No, we do,
really noisy.
yeah, we do, if there's gonna be a frost, we'll have a big fan out. But our production and crush pad and all of that is right there where the new homes are gonna be, and that's pretty loud.
Or the counties, just to get taxes, they wanted more tax money, is that why they wouldn't keep it in?
No, we wanted, it was, so it was actually one of the owners, the three owners, and they wanted to move the system to the city for wastewater treatment, better wastewater treatment.
And you couldn't do that for the,
Mm-mm.
is that gonna happen?
Yeah, yep, yeah,
So it was all put more on taxes, et cetera, and everything?
I think so, yeah. Yeah. But, and then that's where I mentioned, and people talked about it before, is, really doing marketing strategies and social media. Like, it's funny because I'm trying to get into social media, but how do you start utilizing those platforms to really advertise who you are and what you stand for, and bringing that community in? That's where we're at with society right now, and we need to embrace it. Ugh.
The wine is delicious.
Thanks. Yeah, yeah, yep. I'm excited, and we have a new winemaker too, so it's gonna be even better and newer, and new things coming out, so. Great. Okay.